It didn't happen slowly. It wasn't subtle. It was a detonation. Loud, violent, public. One week, he was the richest black man in American history. The next, he was bleeding partnerships, money, and respect. And no one saw it coming. Except maybe Kanye himself. This is the story of how Ye, once a global symbol of creative brilliance and entrepreneurial dominance, lost over $1 billion in a single week. Not to theft. Not to failure. To himself. October 2022. Ye's world was on fire, but not in the way he wanted. For years, he had meticulously sculpted an empire from raw talent and relentless ambition. Yeezy had become a cultural force, blending fashion with streetwear in a way that had never been done before. His Adidas partnership had changed the game. His deal with Gap was supposed to reinvent the American mall. He wasn't just making music anymore. He was making markets move. But with one reckless media spree littered with inflammatory comments, shocking interviews, and anti-Semitic statements, the empire started collapsing, piece by piece. First, Adidas. The company that had once said the partnership with he was the most significant launch ever dropped him overnight. They didn't sugarcoat it. They called his behavior unacceptable, hateful, and dangerous. That decision alone wiped $1.5 billion off his net worth. Just like that. Then came Gap, swiftly ending their collaboration. Balenciaga, CAA, Foot Locker. One after another, dominoes fell. Not because of poor sales. Not because the product wasn't working. Because he himself had become toxic. Financially, it was catastrophic. Before the fallout, Forbes estimated his net worth at $2 billion. Within days, that number was slashed to $400 million, a stunning, almost unbelievable collapse. But behind the headlines and dollar signs was a deeper truth. Kanye didn't just lose partnerships. He lost leverage. He lost control over the Yeezy supply chain, which Adidas owned. He lost distribution, legal support, manufacturing. He lost trust. And yet, he wasn't shaken. He responded by doubling down, making more appearances, saying more outrageous things. He claimed his net worth was still over $2.7 billion, citing private valuations. But the world wasn't buying it. And neither were investors. Here's the paradox. Kanye West is a visionary. A genius. But genius doesn't protect you from consequence. In fact, when left unchecked, genius can become self-destruction. And that's what this was. It's not about being right. It's about being smart. His collapse wasn't due to bad ideas. It was due to ego, a refusal to separate personal emotion from business logic. He crossed lines no brand could afford to defend. And once the trust broke, the money vanished. When your wealth is built on partnerships, reputation is your currency. Lose it, and everything else follows. The twist? Adidas itself suffered a financial hit. Cutting ties with you wasn't cheap. In fact, it cost them hundreds of millions in unsold Yeezy inventory. They struggled to move product without his name. But they still said goodbye. Why? Because reputational risk is more expensive than missed revenue. Even if someone makes you money, sometimes you have to walk away. That's a brutal truth in business. And you learned it the hard way. Kanye West didn't go broke. He's still rich. But he's not a billionaire anymore. Because in the end, it wasn't the market, the fans, or the fashion that brought him down. It was Kanye versus Kanye. And Kanye lost. He wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't handed a brand. He built it. Brick by brick. Beat by beat. Word by word. Kanye West didn't just want money. He wanted power. Ownership. Control. And for a time, he had all three. But beneath the empire was a fragile foundation, himself. Because the greatest threat to Kanye West's fortune wasn't Adidas. It wasn't cancel culture. It was Kanye. Let's rewind. In 2004, Kanye's debut album The College Dropout exploded onto the scene. But it wasn't just music. It was a manifesto. A declaration. He wasn't here to play the game. He was here to break it. As his fame grew, so did his ambitions. Kanye didn't want to just be an artist. He wanted to be a mogul, like Jay-Z, like Steve Jobs, like Walt Disney. He talked like them, thought like them. But he wanted something even they didn't have, a fashion empire with his name stitched into every seam. The problem? No one took him seriously. Fashion insiders mocked him. Brands dismissed him. They didn't see a designer. They saw a rapper with a clothing hobby. So Kanye did what Kanye always does. He fought. And that fight turned into Yeezy. He started with Nike. Released the Yeezy. It sold out in minutes. But Nike refused to give him royalties. no ownership, no equity. So he walked away. That decision was everything. Most people would have stayed, played it safe. But Kanye didn't want a check. He wanted a piece. Then came Adidas. The German giant gave him what Nike wouldn't: full creative control, equity, royalties. The Yeezy Boost 350 wasn't just a sneaker, it was a cultural reset. The shoes sold out instantly. Prices skyrocketed on resale markets. By 2019, Yeezy was generating $1.3 billion annually for Adidas. For the first time in history, a musician had built a fashion brand valued in the billions on his terms. It was a financial masterpiece. Until the chaos started leaking through the cracks. Kanye has always been open about his battles, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. But as his star rose, so did the volatility. Public rants, erratic tweets, presidential runs, overshares. His mind, once his greatest asset, became the source of market panic. Investors and brands don't like unpredictability. He once said, "I am Warhol. I am Shakespeare. I am Walt Disney." But those men didn't have billion-dollar partners to lose. And when he lashed out at Jews, at corporations, at colleagues, the backlash was swift, unforgiving, and expensive. But here's the lesson hiding in plain sight. Vision without restraint is dangerous. You can dream big. You can challenge systems. But if you torch every bridge, you'll eventually be standing alone. And when you're alone, in business, you stop being an asset. You become a liability. Even genius has a price tag. Kanye wanted out. In a podcast interview, he bragged about being uncancelable. He even said, "I can say anti-Semitic things and Adidas can't drop me." Days later, they did. He knew the consequences were coming. He may have even wanted them. Because for Kanye, control has always been more important than money. Kanye West built a billion-dollar brand from thin air. And then he tested the boundaries of what one man could say and survive. Financially, professionally, publicly. But the real tragedy isn't that he lost it. It's that he threw it away, just to prove he could. The world laughed when he said he'd be a billionaire. They called him arrogant, delusional, a rapper trying to play CEO. But they weren't laughing when Forbes confirmed it. Because the truth is, Kanye West didn't become a billionaire by chance. He engineered it. And at the center of that engineering? A single word: Yeezy. Let's unpack the numbers. By 2020, Yeezy wasn't just a sneaker line. It was a cultural monopoly. The hype was biblical. Limited drops. Endless resale demand. Celebrity endorsements. Every release was an event. Adidas had a gold mine. But it wasn't theirs. Unlike Nike, who owned the designs and the brand, Adidas made a different deal. They gave Kanye full ownership of Yeezy. They would manufacture, distribute, and market the product. But the brand, the IP, the creative control, the design vision, all belonged to Ye. He didn't just design shoes. He owned the blueprints. That detail changed everything. In 2020, Yeezy generated nearly $1.7 billion in revenue. Kanye personally pocketed about $191 million in royalties that year alone, and his stake in the Yeezy brand was estimated at over $1.5 billion. That valuation, that equity, is what made him a billionaire. He didn't build wealth through album sales. He built it through licensing deals, IP ownership, and equity structures that would make even seasoned VCs jealous. That was the brilliance. He used Adidas to scale, but he never gave them the keys. And in doing so, he became more than an artist, he became a brand architect. But there was always one flaw in the design: dependence. Behind the scenes, Adidas held more power than people realized. Yes, Kanye owned the brand. But Adidas owned the infrastructure, the manufacturing, the distribution channels, the supply chain, the global reach. Without them, Yeezy wasn't scalable. The partnership worked until Kanye made it unworkable. He started attacking Adidas publicly, accused them of copying his designs, called out executives by name, mocked their decisions, challenged their leadership. He didn't just burn bridges. He went live with a flamethrower. And eventually, Adidas had to respond, not as a brand partner, but as a corporation protecting its shareholders. When they dropped him, they didn't just cut a deal. They amputated $1 billion limb. Here's the business lesson. Leverage can make you rich. But no matter how creative or visionary you are, partnerships need protection. If you want to scale with others, you have to separate personal emotion from business execution. Kanye's empire was real. His vision was rare. But his failure to respect the balance of power? That was fatal. Because even if you own the brand, If you don't control the means to produce it, you're vulnerable. And you found that out the hard way. Even after the breakup, Adidas was stuck with a warehouse full of Yeezys, about $1.3 billion worth. At first, they planned to destroy them. Then they decided to sell them off slowly, donating portions of the proceeds to charity. The irony? Kanye still earns royalties from those sales. Yes, even after everything, Adidas is still paying him. Because legally, they have to. That's how deeply he built himself into the system. Kanye West once said, "I am not a businessman. I am a businessman." And for a while, he was right. But when the business starts attacking its own infrastructure, there's only one possible outcome: collapse. He wanted to dress the world. Not just the rich. Not just the hype beasts. Everyone. From teenagers in Southside Chicago to billionaires in Beverly Hills. That was Kanye West's dream, to redefine fashion at both extremes. And for a moment, it looked like he was going to pull it off. In 2020, Kanye inked a 10-year deal with Gap, a heritage American brand that had been fading for years. Their sales were stagnant. Their relevance? Non-existent. But Kanye saw something different. He saw scale. He didn't want to make $500 hoodies. He wanted to make $50 Yeezy t-shirts for millions. Affordable. Minimalist. Mass-produced. Yeezy for the people. Gap handed him the keys. They agreed to launch a sub-brand, Yeezy Gap. The hype was immediate. Kanye tweeted a blue square. That's it. And within hours, it had millions of likes. When the first item, a $200 round jacket, dropped, it sold out online in less than 24 hours. People waited months just to receive it. The brand was back in headlines. Gap stock jumped 42% the day the partnership was announced. But behind the scenes? Chaos. Kanye wanted full control. He wanted to redesign stores, build pop-up concepts, choose fabrics, dictate pricing, shoot campaigns. Gap had other ideas. They had process, structure, committees. He called them slow, outdated, bureaucratic. They called him erratic, unmanageable. Then Kanye did what he always does when he feels boxed in. He went public. He accused Gap of stealing designs, of cutting him out of meetings, of ignoring his creative vision. He posted private texts. It wasn't business strategy. It was war. In 2022, the deal collapsed. At the same time he was trying to democratize fashion with Gap, he was also collaborating with Balenciaga, one of the most elite luxury houses in the world. With Gap, he was selling to the masses. With Balenciaga, he was styling the elite. It was a paradox only Kanye could embody. Two deals. Two worlds. One man in the middle. Yeezy Gap, engineered by Balenciaga, was the strange, beautiful offspring of that paradox. High fashion design. Gap-level distribution. A $100 hoodie with a $900 silhouette. It was disruptive, exciting, and short-lived. When Ye's public controversies exploded, Balenciaga dropped him immediately. No press release. No negotiation. Just silence. Gap followed. Then CAA. Then JP Morgan Chase. His name became radioactive. And within days, the entire Yeezy Gap x Balenciaga line was pulled from stores and websites. Kanye never got full control. He never got equity in Gap. He wasn't even on the board. Despite the hype, Gap reported that Yeezy products didn't significantly lift long-term sales. And when the deal ended, they were left with millions in unsold stock. A massive opportunity, lost in the noise. Scale is not enough. You can have vision, you can have the product, but if you don't understand the system, you'll be crushed by it. Kanye tried to bend corporate America to his will. But Gap and Balenciaga weren't startups. They were institutions. And institutions don't move at the speed of impulse. They move at the speed of strategy. Ye once said he wanted to be the Steve Jobs of fashion. But even Jobs had a board, a team, a filter. Kanye wanted the whole pyramid, from the basement to the penthouse. But the fashion world isn't built that way. Not yet. And in trying to wear every crown at once, he ended up wearing none. When the lights go out, all that's left is silence. No brands. No business partners. Just a man. And his consequences. This is what happens after a billion-dollar fall. After Adidas, Gap, Balenciaga, CAA, and JP Morgan cut ties, Kanye West was no longer a brand. He was a risk. A cautionary tale. His reputation had become financial poison. The Yeezy name, once shorthand for luxury streetwear dominance, was radioactive. Retailers refused to stock him. Streaming platforms distanced themselves. His interviews were pulled. His bank literally closed his account. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Ye was alone. No distribution, no infrastructure, no empire. But if you know anything about Kanye West, you know one thing. He doesn't disappear. He reinvents. And so, almost immediately after the collapse, Ye launched a new plan. No middlemen, no corporations, just direct to consumer. He would sell his product his way. He started teasing unreleased designs, re-emerged in all-black masks, bought Parler, a fringe conservative social media app, vowing to rebuild on his own terms. He hired new lawyers, trademarked new names, quietly registered entities for future ventures. He called it independence. But the world saw something else, isolation. Because here's the truth. You could still design. He could still create. But without a factory, without global logistics, without e-commerce platforms or retail channels, there was no product pipeline. The genius was still there. But the machine that scaled it? Gone. And in business, genius without execution is just a headline. Financially, the cracks were deepening. He claimed he was worth $2.7 billion. Forbes said $400 million. Who was right? No one knows. His assets were now opaque. The partnerships were gone. The brand was splintered. All that remained was real estate, music royalties, and Yeezy IP that he couldn't manufacture at scale. At least not yet. Then came the strange moves. In early 2023, he married Bianca Censori, an architectural designer from Yeezy. No announcements. No press. Just a private ceremony. Then public sightings in Italy wearing bizarre, skin-tight designs and masks. Tabloids speculated. Fans theorized. Was this a brand relaunch? A performance piece? A mental health spiral? Kanye said nothing. But the message was clear. He was rebuilding. In silence. On his terms. In 2023 and early 2024, Adidas, despite cutting ties, began selling off its $1.3 billion worth of Yeezy inventory. Quietly. Online. Limited drops. And every time they did, Kanye got a cut. Because the royalty agreement still held. Legally, they had to pay him. Even exiled, he was still making money. Still profiting. Even when no one wanted to admit it. That's the paradox of Kanye West. You can remove the man from the machine. But the machine still has his fingerprints. When you lose everything, you have 2 options. Collapse. Or recalibrate. Kanye chose the second. But it came with a cost. Rebuilding without trust is harder than building from scratch. Because this time, people remember the fire you started. And they're not standing close anymore. Kanye West has always believed he was chosen. That the rules didn't apply. That he could lose it all and come back stronger. Maybe he will. But here's the lesson. No matter how creative you are, you cannot outcreate consequence. Vision without humility becomes delusion. And delusion, left unchecked, becomes destruction. It's easy to say he lost control. That he spiraled. Burned bridges. Went too far. But what if he didn't? What if the collapse, the backlash, the outrage, the exile was exactly what he wanted? Because here's the thing. Kanye West has never followed the rules. He's broken them, bent them, rewritten them. And often, he's turned controversy into currency. Every time people counted him out, he came back stronger. Every time he said something outrageous, album sales spiked. When he stormed the stage at the VMAs, he became a villain and then sold millions. When he wore a red hat, he dominated the news cycle for weeks. When he ran for president, it wasn't about votes. It was about voice, attention, presence, power. He doesn't run from controversy. He manufactures it. So what if 2022 wasn't a breakdown, but a reset? What if Kanye was done being a partner? Done sharing profits, decision-making, boardrooms? What if he was ready to burn the house down, just to prove he didn't need it? Because let's not forget, even before Adidas dropped him, he was publicly trashing them, accusing them of theft, demanding his exit, mocking their executives, saying he was the king and they couldn't touch him. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He dared them to leave. And when they finally did, he smiled. This is the Kanye paradox. He destroys what he builds. But sometimes that destruction makes him bigger. It's a move he's pulled again and again. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it backfires. But it's always intentional. Case in point, Donda 2. In 2022, you released the album exclusively on the Stem Player, a $200 device made by his own tech company. He didn't drop it on Spotify, or Apple, or Tidal. He walked away from the entire streaming ecosystem. And guess what? He reportedly made over $2 million in just 24 hours. No label. No platform cut. Just his tech, his rules. It was messy. Incomplete. Not polished. But it was profitable. In pure Kanye. That's his pattern. Reject the system. Build a new one. Profit from chaos. Even if it costs him everything in the process. Not all losses are accidents. Sometimes, losing is part of the plan. Sometimes you blow up your own empire, just so you don't owe anyone a piece of it. But here's the danger. If you burn every bridge, even your most loyal fans might stop rebuilding with you. And when no one shows up to your next comeback, the spotlight doesn't dim. It goes out. Since the collapse, you has hinted at a return. Quiet moves. New designs. Cryptic trademarks. Underground concerts. No brand backing him. No distributor pushing him. But still, the world watches. Because Kanye West doesn't need mainstream approval to dominate a conversation. He just needs a camera. A moment. A reason. And he knows it. Was it ego? Was it strategy? Was it madness? Maybe it was all three. But if there's one thing to take from this chapter, it's this. Controversy is not a plan. It's a flare. It can light your path. Or burn everything you built. And in Kanye West's case, it's done both. He had it all. Not just money. Not just fame. Power. The kind of power few ever touch. The power to change culture, shift markets, ignite revolutions in fashion, music, business. He didn't just influence. He dominated. But the higher he rose, the more fragile everything became. Because Kanye West didn't just build an empire. He became it. And that was the beginning of the end. It started with a dream. A kid from Chicago who believed he was destined for more. Who turned beats into hits. Hits into brands. Brands into billions. He saw himself as more than an artist. More than a mogul. More than a man. He saw himself as a force. But forces can't be tamed. And eventually, they collide with everything around them. Even themselves. He turned rejection into leverage. Nike said no. He created Yeezy. Fashion laughed at him. He built a billion-dollar label. The industry shut him out. He never stopped moving. Never stopped pushing. And for a time, it worked. He redefined the value of creative equity. He showed the world that artists don't need to license their power. They can own it. He fought for independence, and he won. Until he lost everything fighting too hard. Because here's the truth. No amount of genius protects you from self-sabotage. And Kanye West's story is not just about money. It's about the cost of ignoring every red flag. He thought he couldn't be canceled. That brands needed him more than he needed them. He was wrong. He thought talent could excuse behavior. That controversy could fuel growth forever. It didn't. He thought ownership meant invincibility. But when you're your own boss, there's no one left to stop you from destroying yourself. And yet, he's not gone. He's not broke. He's not forgotten. Even now, in silence, he's moving, watching, rebuilding. He might return stronger, or stranger, or smaller, or maybe not at all. But his story already taught us what it needed to. Money isn't the goal. It's a mirror. It reflects your discipline, your decisions, your relationships. And in Kanye's case, it reflected both brilliance and blindness. He earned billions, but he couldn't protect them. Because the greatest empire you'll ever manage is your own behavior. Protect your partnerships. Check your ego. Separate your emotions from your decisions. And remember, your brand is not just what you build. It's what people are willing to stay loyal to when things fall apart. Subscribe to Money and Fame. Which celebrity's financial story should we tell next? Write it in the comments. Thank us and see you.